Good morning, friends. Welcome to OBEJournal 2013 as we continue with our explorations of the various realms of spirit and focusing on spontaneous projections from the waking state, as opposed to some of my earlier journals from 2018, 2019, where I was often recalling an OBE from the sleeping state a couple of hours later. And is one better than the other? They have different qualities. And they both extend the consciousness of the spirit while encased in flesh. And I'm going to start with another fascinating projection from Waldo Vieira's book, Projections of the Consciousness. I became fully aware inside an ample building in a district of European metropolis. I was accompanied by an extra-physical consciousness who requested that I remain calm and be observant of the local surroundings. We passed through some well-furnished but empty reception areas and offices. In an outlying room we saw an elegant and very respectable-looking elderly man who was busy with some documents at the door of an immense safe. In the next room on the left, a man in his 40s sat alone on a couch, apparently in intense concentration, with his eyes closed and his arms resting on the back of a couch. Two other rooms on the right were occupied, one by an elderly-looking extra-physical male and the other two by two persons, all quite relaxed in chairs, seated in front of desks, completely self-absorbed. Now, having an overall view of the luxurious furnishedly office, and still accompanied by an alert and tranquil extra-physical consciousness, I identified the thoughts coming from the minds of the concentrating gentlemen. I experienced an emotional shock. I was able to control myself only due to other surprises I have handled in the past. I quickly understood the nature and extent of the activities occurring in the complete silence, and without any assistance or support staff on this night shift between Sunday and Monday. These men were transmitting intense mental suggestions to certain other persons, utilizing thought at a distance. The scenes and the auras of the isolated men were unmistakable. One of them was concentrating so hard that his whole face was wrinkled up. As he did so, the purpose of their routine mental efforts became clear. They were trying to influence businessmen to make major investment decisions, probably during the next day. Astonished upon discovering the purpose of this telepathic transmitted hypnosis, I wanted to get a little closer to the man on my right, to the front of the couch where he was seated. A large photo of an unfamiliar grey-haired gentleman stood out from numerous documents spread out on the desk. This was the victim. I was surprised to see the image of potential client come to the surface of this long-distance suggestion technique that was more sophisticated and dishonest than I had ever imagined could exist. This was a war of thoughts, with unimaginable repercussions in both worlds. It was, as we might say, contemporary voodoo, in the hunt for money, with subtle inferior purposes and devoid of any good intentions. I was informed that this was psychic exploitation at its worst, because its power was used against those who were unwary or mentally unprotected. Typically the head of enterprises or companies upon which thousands of people depended from their physical survival. Still stunned by the sight of the papers, the photo and the ideas, and not wishing to accept the reality of these mental insertions, I went to view the two other rooms. Unfortunately, the same thing was going on in there. The only difference was that the two white-collar workers in the thought control chamber were concentrating together, calmly weaving mental currents with no break in rhythm, vigorously trying to modify the mental attitude of a single victim. The extra-physical consciousness at my side mentally followed my observations on the extent of human debauchery. Interesting use of that word. Where the most sublime resources of the energy of thoughts capable of yielding cures and everlasting happiness are subverted for the purpose of influencing businessmen in order to increase personal wealth, which is inevitably lost with the death of the body. It was explained to me that the atmosphere of these offices was a little heavier and more difficult than that of the ordinary human business space, due to invasion by capricious and sick extra-physical consciousness, who were very good at playing dishonest mental games and who assisted the hypnotists to manipulate those under remote hypnosis. These cohorts had been temporarily removed to allow us to peacefully and carefully examine the surroundings. The extra-physical consciousness commented, that would be a guide of some sort. In answer to insistent queries, we see here the natural obstacle to the widespread development of the phenomena of projection. Can you imagine the projector who nourishes such intentions? The negative suggestions could have much more disastrous effects when applied directly. Nevertheless, the ethics of the cosmic being, the cosmoethic, cannot be fooled. The inevitable consequences may appear to be slow in arriving, but they always come. No one is exempt from being the victim of their own negative works. Could Mesmer, Charcot, and other luminaries in the history of hypnotism ever imagined an operation like this, so highly systematized on such solid but decadent foundations? The secret and methodical characters of the activities in this environment was a fact, and the seriousness of the enterprise unfortunately left no room for doubt. Lawlessness is being practiced, and it is going unnoticed. Worst of all, it is going unpunished because it is not within the reach of human laws, whose penal and civil codes still do not have provisions prohibiting infractions of this kind. Police organizations still do not have awakened to this reality, being too burdened by common assaults to think about the improper use of the most powerful weapon available to criminals: misdirected thoughts, which affect those open to that type of influence. It is worth questioning, what is the limit of the powers of the mind? What are the ultimate means that can be used in the struggle for personal interests? If carefully thought out decisions can be influenced by certain persons, what can be said of the effect of that extra-physical consciousness can have on people's hasty decisions? I did not accompany the events as they progressed through the night and into the morning. Nevertheless, who can tell whether any of these men, so dedicated to the trade of transmitting suggestions over a distance, would not, from their office at home, leave the body in the middle of the night and directly persuade the unwary? It is possible for sick intraphysical and extraphysical consciousnesses with bad intentions to consciously or unconsciously provoke considerable mental damage to those who have not cultivated mental discipline. This fact raises a myriad of political and social issues which, sooner or later, must seriously be considered by human organizations. It is for this reason that projection constitutes the most transcendent psychic manifestation, as it involves many sectors of intraphysical life. After observing that princely den of thieves for some time, I left the exquisitely furnished locale in a thoughtful, slow return to my physical base with the helper. Some observations. This night's excursion reminded me of news about the interest among powerful governments in the use of projection as a means of spying on other nations, including the contemporary appropriation, copying, and subsequent return of secret strategic defense plans. And I think this is possible in the crustal dimension. The extra-physical duplicate, However, the question of transporting objects with consecutive dematerialization and rematerialization is extremely problematic. I would never submit to such experiments in view of their purpose, as they concentrate a nasty business for the experimenter. The preservation of the noble aspect of the projection is fundamental to maintaining the consciousness and conscientious equilibrium of the projector and the quality of their companions. Now, that raises, of course, many questions, and it has been noted since then by other projectors, including myself, that governments and corporations do actively engage in all this and have projectors, psychics, working for them. And certainly the CIA has admitted to this. And, many years ago, it was quite well known, distance viewing. Admitted their program was used for some years, but then said it wasn't so successful, so they abandoned it. But the various projectors talked about, once they were unemployed, what they had been doing, and psyching out distance viewing of military installations and ships with large quantities of illegal drugs, etc., etc., which they were successfully arrested, or so they say. And most of the projectors set up their own consciousness projection schools, and would advertise on the internet and are still ongoing. So we can assume that many people can do this, although how they pursue it for personal interest or curiosity is not immediately apparent. But it just raises all these questions about idealistic activity to better mankind, and more selfish activity to better the self. Either the self is the head of corporations or governments, or a group, like the groups we call the elites. And it also raises the next question of competitive activities. One set of projectors or influencers go for a certain goal, and another set might go against that goal. To me, it seems more like another replication of economic and physical war. And I can't see anyone coming out on top, particularly, although there's always temporary victories, as in wars and diplomacy and spycraft and economic competitions. Who's going to get that contract? Who's going to blow up that pipeline? That sort of a thing. Whose missiles are the best? Who bribes who with threats? It leads into all that sort of level of complexity. And but one can see how easily it would be to slip into this advantages for self, the lust for power and wealth, and the history as we know it of ceremonial magic and its practitioners is very similar. Magicians doing this, doing that, using elementals as helpers. There's several accounts of this in the literature. The elementals that wish to be of service to humans in order to benefit themselves, in order to extend their experience. They're rather like domestic pets, fetching the paper and the slippers. They'll do all sorts of things. And they think they're serving their master, and their master is a glorious being that it deserves to be served. And elementals are quite similar. Nature spirits sometimes, there's a whole host of them, as we know. And I find the elementals in my house and garden are a mixture of desires. Some want to serve, some want to interact, some want to we'll say inflict generously. The garden spirits often have plans for the garden that they employ me to do, and by influencing my thoughts. But it's creative stuff, and there's nothing destructive about it. I'm just learning to be one of them, as many gardeners do, and will tell you, but maybe not in those languages. So, is that in the sort of famous people that you've seen me talk to in the last few days? I'm not trying to influence anybody. I'm just interacting. I'm not trying to lay any plans. I'm just trying to see how they feel about things, how they think, and how they are operating on their own agendas, which they feel are appropriate and useful and honorable, despite what others may think. This extends my personal understanding, as put out in the various books and videos, that everyone is available to be spoken with, dead or alive, and that everyone is involved in evolutionary education, which involves the employment of agendas that appear to be useful and purposeful and creative and honorable. Everyone. There's nobody who's without that. There are, of course, more angelic beings that are beyond personal gain, beyond personal glory, who are completely in service to what they perceive or have been given to them as the evolution of spirit on the planet. They think that is honorable, and I would tend to agree, it is. But I'm trying to spread out the metaphor here. Everybody, including the people you don't really like that much, believe they have a useful, creative, worthwhile, honorable agenda or set of agendas. Whether they're out for personal gain, they will find ways to justify it, or the gain of their organization. And this includes religions, I might add. Religions are vast investment corporations, even the smaller ones. And they implement their agendas that they think are worthwhile, honorable, serving God, etc., etc. So in this carnival of activity and counteractivity and joyfulness, celebration, suffering, grieving, tragedy, that continues on throughout our many lives until we sort of, graduate one way or another. There are several ways to graduate. We are participants in this giddy carnival of life. And achieving the still point through meditation or contemplation or just general stillness is a laudable and interesting goal of what I've called the inner journey. And I've been thinking about someone in North American culture who achieved that and portrayed it in a number of his books and talks. And he's moved on from this plane many years ago, 20, 25, maybe even longer. Alan Watts, the Western purveyor of Zen and Taoism, and still very influential today. I see him quoted all over the place, and rightly so. He discovered that still point and learned to inhabit it and learned to convey that to others. And with that biographical gratefulness, let me see if I can project to where he is, Alan Watts. He has picked, I think he's picked, a rural area of rugged beauty overlooking a bay that might be San Francisco Bay, and overlooking places like Sausalito. And perhaps because he feels comfortable there, and B, knows that's a location that people will recognize from his writings. And I'm sitting with him in a comfortable chair in what seems to be a garden in front of a cabin, maybe. And but being the astral plane, he could just have made that with 10 minutes ago. And he's smiling and nodding. So he's thanking me for the generous introduction. And I said, you're well worth it, Mr. Watts. Your influence is profound and joyous in a meditative fashion. Many have benefited from your communications and still do. And he's saying, and not so many of them come to see me like you. And I said, well, hopefully this will change things. You're aware that I believe it's your son, Mark, is still taking care of the distribution of your writings and talks. I picked up one just a couple of weeks ago. And they're great little reference works. Handy to have around for momentary inspiration. So people will be asking, Mr. Watts, how you're enjoying your afterlife. And he's saying, well, to me, it's all one life. There is no life and afterlife, not really. There just is the one life with various phases and various chapters. And yes, I know you're going to ask about past lives, and I'm indeed aware of those, as I'm aware of some of them when I was still Alan Watts. Now I'm kind of Alan Watts plus. And again, to me, it's all one life, whether in the Earth's physical plane or the spirit planes around the Earth. It's all one life. You change your names, you change your face. You adopt a culture, you live in it, you put it aside. You can imagine from my writings and philosophies what kind of cultures those would be. Although you can add to that businessmen and military men, women, many women, in various roles, some wealthy, some not so wealthy, some influential, some grasping and clutching at power. by the time I became Alan Watts, I was ready to sift through all that and find the, how shall we say, the gold of consciousness from the various grasping activities of earlier lives. Discovering Zen and bringing it to North America was, I think, my contribution, my major contribution. Showing the various schools and how they have their advantages and disadvantages, and how the modern man and woman could employ those techniques to achieve an inner stillness, to achieve a consciousness beyond the hurly-burly buying and selling of the ego in the flesh, of the anxious, ambitious ego. I certainly got caught up in the cycles of communication and gain and ego gratification. If anyone would like to accuse me of that, I will certainly bow down and admit I did get caught up in my star status, and was perhaps not the all-round nicest guy, but I did try to achieve a stillness and an insight that would benefit others. I was no saint, and I did not claim to be one. And after all, who is? And in the ups and downs and ins and outs of personality and its expression, the ego and its activities, there are bound to be areas of regret and shame and, that sort of thing, remorse. But looking back at it, on it, in it, one can see they're all valuable. They're all lessons to be learned. They're all behaviors to be mastered. And but let's stop talking about me. Okay, Mr. Watts. I feel that your words are very beneficial to all, and I'm not insisting that you stop talking about yourself. But if you feel that way, then perhaps you would like to give us some thoughts on how you see the earth, the world now that it's moved on and developed more technologies and more instant communication. Well, in meditation, while I was still Alan Watts on Earth, I could feel such things coming, but did not really imagine them in detail. And it is fascinating to watch, to come here and see its development from here, because, as you know, technically minded people that were quote-unquote dead helped develop this stuff and then transmitted it to those researchers on Earth that were in the same line. And the progress through the internet, as I know you're referring to that, and various telecommunications and satellites and whatnot, was, intriguing to watch. Also enjoyable to let go and forget. The sort of fear-based activities employing those techniques were tiresome. But at the same time, mere continuations of anxious egos trying to increase or maintain their level of control and wealth all throughout history. We just got a little more clever at it. And we are still getting clever. But the Tower of Babel, of the chaos of cultures and languages and attitudes, has been pacified to some degree by the regular and often quite efficient communication through the telepathy of the internet. The internet is essentially telepathically transmitted thought on a screen, on a voice, on a vision, and has, I believe, been of great benefit to mankind in its movement toward harmonious understanding of each other. Despite the high-tech wars that go on, they will go on, and they will lead to the defeat of egos rather than the triumph of aggressiveness, I believe. And I believe it looking at it now. Do not be distracted by vicious economic or military activity. It has always gone on, and you do not have to participate. You can choose a birth that will avoid those areas. You can choose a life that sidesteps all that silliness. You can pursue your spiritual agenda and care for your loved ones and family without participating in all that nonsense. Make no mistake. Make careful choices, either before being born or after being born. Do not be swayed by the propaganda of the state or religion or ego. I know I make it sound terribly simple, but in essence it is. And I know you're wondering about my life here. It's very enjoyable. It's a heavenly world, and paradise awaits all who long for it. And in the excitement of that paradise, you can still find calmness, serenity, stillness, a point from which all can be enjoyed and understood. Well, Mr. Watts, that is just lovely. Thank you very much. And again, I give my thanks for the audience and myself. It has been quite a pleasure being with you. And as it was a great pleasure to read your books in many years ago as a young, questing, interested spirit. You made a nice balance with the voices of the 70s and 80s, the channels, the ashram frauds. You know, you made a great balance. I really enjoyed that, and I thank you for it. Okay, thank you, sir. We'll put this up on the internet in no time. God bless you, sir. Ah, God. And is he going to really bless me? He chuckles. That's another discussion. Yes, I agree with you, it is. I'm not really a big God guy, but, you know, it's a civilized greeting. God bless you, sir. Well, friends, And hope you enjoyed that, and we'll get on to part 2 in no time at all.